Chapter 1. The visitor from Morecombe Hullet was a grey and dismal afternoon when Hercule Poirot, the world-renowned Belgian detective, was interrupted from his meticulous arrangement of a bowl of oranges and lemons on the side table of his immaculate Whitehaven Mansions flat. Outside, the sky brooded with the promise of rain, and within all was fastidiously in order, as Poirot preferred it. He turned with a frown of slight annoyance when his valet George knocked discreetly on the sitting-room door. "There is a lady to see you, sir," George announced in his even, emotionless voice. "She says her name is Miss Delphine March." Poirot's brows arched. "Miss March? I do not know the name. Is she distressed, George? She appears agitated, sir, though she carries it well. Then by all means show her in." George withdrew, and within a moment ushered in a tall, elegantly dressed woman in her late 30s. Her clothes were expensive but sober. A deep green travelling coat with velvet trim, matching gloves, and a small feathered hat that had seen better days. Her eyes, dark and restless, darted around the room before finally settling on Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, stepping forward and offering a gloved hand, "I must apologize for arriving unannounced. My name is Delphine March. I've come from Morecombe Hall." Poirot took her hand delicately and inclined his head. "Enchanted, Mademoiselle March. Pray, do sit. Now tell me, what is it that brings you all the way from the countryside to disturb a quiet afternoon in London?" Miss March hesitated, as if uncertain whether to speak or flee. Then she sat, her back straight, her expression carefully controlled. "It is something strange, Monsieur Poirot. Something that I fear will sound foolish, even mad. Nothing is foolish if it troubles you. Please, begin." She looked down, removing one glove, as if the act of exposing her hand would give her courage. "I live at Morecombe Hall. It is an old house, been in the March family for generations. There are only two of us there now, my brother Lionel and I. He's the master of the estate, but I manage much of the household." Poirot nodded encouragingly. "In the east wing, which is mostly closed off, there's a portrait of our great-great-aunt Isadora March. It's an old oil painting, dark and rather stern. Always gave me the creeps as a child, truth be told. And 80, in the secondaire," paused, wetting her lips. "It began last month. I was passing the gallery on the way to the linen rooms, and I thought I heard a voice, whispering, faint, like wind behind the walls, but it seemed to come from near the portrait. I dismissed it, of course." Poirot leaned forward. "And yet it happened again." She nodded. "More than once. The last time, 3 nights ago, I swear I heard my name spoken. Delphine, it said, clear as anything, right in my ear. But there was no one there, no open windows, no draught, just the portrait staring at me from across the room." There was a silence. Poirot folded his hands and regarded her keenly. "And what do you believe, Miss March? That the painting is haunted?" She gave a quick, nervous laugh. "I don't know what I believe, but Lionel, he's changed since it began. He avoids the east wing entirely now. He's pale, nervous, muttering to himself, and he's taken to locking his study, which he never used to do." Poirot's eyes glittered. "And you suspect he knows something?" "I do. I think he's afraid of something, and that it has to do with the portrait." She leaned forward now, intensity replacing fear. I know this sounds absurd, but I have the feeling that something terrible is going to happen. Poirot sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Mademoiselle, may I ask, has there ever been tragedy associated with the portrait before? Not that I know of, but I remember our old housekeeper once said that Isadora March had secrets she took to her grave. She said that the portrait should have been removed long ago. She left us years back, muttering about curses and whispers. Indeed, said Poirot slowly. And what is your brother's view on the matter? He refuses to speak of it. He pretends I'm imagining things. But I'm not. I know what. I heard. Poirot stood, clasping his hands behind his back. Then it is fortunate you came to me. Ghosts, you see, do not frighten me. I do not believe in them. But people and their secrets, that, mademoiselle, is another matter. Her shoulders sagged with relief. You will come to Morecambe Hall? With great pleasure. I find old country houses, particularly those with whispering portraits, to be most intriguing. May I ask, does anyone else reside in the house? Only the staff. Mrs. Belling, our cook and housekeeper, and Tom Drury, the groundsman. They've been with us for years. Mrs. Belling is loyal to Lionel. Tom keeps to himself. Poirot tapped his chin thoughtfully. And the painting, has it ever been moved or altered? She shook her head. Not since I can remember. It's hung there for generations. Then let us see what lies beneath. The varnish of history, n'est-ce pas? He rang for George and instructed him to pack a bag. Miss March, visibly relieved, offered to arrange a car to take them back to Morecambe Hall the next morning. As the door closed behind her, Poirot turned to the window. The clouds outside had thickened into a low-hanging mist, and the first drops of rain began to trickle down the pane. "Eh bien," he murmured, "a haunted painting, a fearful brother, a whisper in the dark. Yes, this will do very nicely." Hugh adjusted the placement of the lemons one last time, symmetry restored, and smiled. Chapter 2. Shadows at Morecambe Hall. The next morning broke misty and damp, a silvery fog hanging over the city like a fine veil. Poirot, wrapped impeccably in a dove-grey overcoat with a silk scarf tucked neatly at his throat, stepped into the waiting motor-car with all the gravitas of a man preparing to meet royalty rather than investigate a whispering ghost. Miss Delphine March was already seated inside, her gloved hands folded neatly on her lap, and her expression unreadable. Morecambe Hall lay in the county of Wiltshire, some 70 miles from London. As the car sped through green fields and leafless woods, Poirot passed the time in thoughtful silence, occasionally smoothing an invisible crease on his gloves, or consulting his pocket-watch, which he declared was 4 minutes ahead of this countryside nonsense. They arrived just past noon. Morecambe Hall emerged from the mist like a slumbering giant. A sprawling stone manor with mullioned windows, ivy-covered walls, and a weathered dignity that spoke of old money and older secrets. The wrought-iron gates creaked open, and the car wound its way up the gravel drive. Poirot regarded the house with approval. A fine structure, old enough to be proud, not so decayed as to be desperate. Yes, I think it suits its mystery well, Delphine led him through the heavy oak front doors, past a grand but slightly faded entrance hall with portraits of long-dead March ancestors looming above them like silent judges. The scent of old wood and lavender polish lingered in the air. A tall, narrow staircase rose like a spine to the upper floors, and through the archways Poirot glimpsed rooms heavy with tapestries and dust. "My brother is in the study," she said quietly. "I haven't told him about you yet." "Très bien. I prefer it that way." A tall maid in a plain uniform came forward. Her face was round, her eyes cautious. "Welcome to Morecambe Hall, sir," she said. "I'm Anna. Mrs. Belling is in the kitchen if you'd like any refreshments." Poirot bowed. "Merci, mademoiselle. Later, perhaps." Delphine turned to him. "Would you like to see the portrait first?" "With great eagerness, mademoiselle." She led him through a series of long, dim corridors until they came to the east wing, a place colder than the rest of the house. The gallery was a narrow room lined with portraits, all darkened with age. It was quiet as a tomb, the only sound the faint ticking of a grandfather clock at the far end. "There," Delphine said, pointing. The portrait of Isidora March hung above a small side table. The woman depicted was severe in appearance, with high cheekbones, pursed lips, and intelligent eyes that seemed to follow the viewer no matter where one stood. She wore black, with a single ruby brooch at her throat. Her hands were folded in her lap, pale, thin, bony. Poirot studied the painting for a long moment. "Tell me," he asked softly, "did you hear the whisper here, standing in front of it?" Delphine nodded. "The last time. It was here. I was alone. It was late." Poirot turned his head slowly, scanning the walls, the floorboards, the spaces behind nearby furniture. He stepped forward and examined the frame. There are no obvious openings, no ventilation shafts, no cracks for sound to travel through. He tapped the wall gently with a knuckle. Solid, thick, and yet there is something. He leaned closer, sniffed the edge of the painting. Then, straightening, he tilted his head and stepped back. "The portrait has been cleaned recently." Delphine blinked. "Cleaned?" "Yes. Notice here, near the left side of the frame. The varnish is newer, slightly shinier than the rest. And here, see the edge? Faint smudge marks. Someone has handled this painting within the last week or so." She swallowed. "I don't know of anyone touching it." "Then we must find who did." He took another slow look around. "Do you have a servant who dusts this wing?" "No, it's mostly unused. Only Anna comes here sometimes to fetch linens from the back cupboard." Poirot nodded. "We must speak with her. But first, I would like to meet your brother." Delphine hesitated. "He's not fond of strangers. He may not be welcoming." "Never mind. Hercule Poirot does not require welcoming. Only truth." They returned to the main wing, and Delphine led him to a heavy door at the far end of a carpeted hallway. She knocked. "Lionel!" There was a moment's pause, then a low voice replied, "Yes." Delphine opened the door and entered with Poirot just behind. The study was warm, lined with bookshelves and filled with the faint scent of pipe tobacco. A fire burned low in the grate. Lionel March was a man of about 45, lean, with thinning, blonde hair and a face that bore the pallor of sleepless nights. He rose stiffly from behind his desk, eyes narrowing at the sight of Poirot. "This is Monsieur Poirot," Delphine said. "He's visiting to—" "I know who he is," Lionel interrupted. His voice was clipped, defensive. "The detective. Why is he here?" Poirot offered a small bow. "To investigate a whisper, monsieur. One that seems to have unsettled this fine household." Lionel looked at Delphine with something close to betrayal. "You brought him into our home?" She met his gaze with quiet firmness. "Something isn't right here, Lionel. You feel it too." He turned away abruptly. "This is foolishness, superstitious rot." Poirot approached the desk. "And yet, monsieur, your sister is clearly distressed. There have been peculiar happenings." Lionel's hands clenched. "You think the portrait is haunted, do you?" "I think the dead often speak, monsieur. Not through ghosts, but through the things they leave behind. Secrets, deeds, objects. Whispers are often the echoes of guilt." Lionel's face darkened. "If you find anything, Poirot, I hope it pleases you. But you'll find no ghosts here." Poirot gave a slight smile. "We shall see." As they left the study, Poirot's eyes lingered on a locked cabinet in the corner, and the papers scattered carelessly across the desk. "Your brother is afraid," he said to Delphine, once they were back in the hall. "Yes, but he won't admit it. He fears not the painting," Poirot said quietly, "but what it may reveal." Chapter 3. The footsteps in the dust. That night, as the wind howled across the moors and Morecambe Hall creaked in protest, Hercule Poirot sat alone in the small guest bedroom assigned to him, its four-poster bed as stiff and upright as a sentry. A single candle flickered on the side table, casting elongated shadows that danced upon the ancient wallpaper. He had not yet unpacked, save for his grooming implements and slippers, which were precisely aligned on the rug. He was deep in thought, seated in the armchair beside the window, when a faint knock came at the door. "Entrez," he called softly. The door opened to reveal Anna, the maid. She stepped inside with hesitant steps, her face pale and uneasy. "Forgive me, sir," she said, "but might I have a word?" Poirot inclined his head. "Certainly, mademoiselle. Come, sit, if it pleases. You?" She did not take the chair offered, instead clutching her apron and remaining by the door. "I heard what Miss Delphine told you, about the whispering. I thought it best I speak." "Très bien. Go on." "It's not just the portrait, sir. It's the house itself. Strange things have been happening for weeks now. At first I thought I was imagining it. Then other servants began to notice too. Such as—" "Well," Anna hesitated. "Footsteps, in the night. Soft but steady. Always in the east wing, where no one goes." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "And you followed them?" She looked horrified. "Oh, no, sir. I'd never be so foolish. But I did peer down the corridor once. There were prints, small, dusty prints in the hallway. They vanished halfway down, like someone had simply disappeared." "Interesting," Poirot murmured. "Continue." "There's more. Once I came into the gallery and found the portrait. It had shifted on the wall. Only a little, but I know I hadn't touched it. None of us had. Then—" "Yes?" She looked around nervously. "Then there are the noises. Low sounds, as though someone is talking just out of earshot. I always thought it was the wind, but I'm not so sure any more." Poirot stood, his expression unreadable. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You have done well to speak, mademoiselle, but fear not. Hercule Poirot is here." She gave a small curtsy and slipped away. Alone again, Poirot turned to the window and gazed into the fog-shrouded darkness. "The whisperings of the dead, the footsteps of the living," he muttered. "This house holds secrets. That is certain." The next morning, Poirot requested to speak with all members of the household. At 10 o'clock sharp, they assembled in the morning room, a long glass-walled chamber overlooking the frozen gardens. The fireplace crackled faintly behind them. There was Delphine March, composed and watchful. Lionel March, brooding in his tweed jacket, arms crossed defensively. Mrs. Belling, the cook, stout and red-cheeked. Anna, demure and nervous. And finally, a new face. A man with a charming smile and dark eyes, who stood by the window, hands in his pockets. "I don't believe we've met," Poirot said, gesturing to the man. "Ah," Delphine interjected. "That's Mr. Philip Ransom. He's staying with us. A family friend." Ransom gave a small bow. "I knew Isadora March, in fact, years ago. I was fond of her." "You were here when she died?" Ransom hesitated. "No. I arrived a fortnight after, business abroad. I returned when I heard the news." Poirot studied him a moment longer, then turned to the others. "Mesdames et messieurs, I ask for your indulgence. This house is like an onion, many layers. I intend to peel them back. But first, I must know who had access to the East Wing in the past 2 weeks. Lionel snorted. "No one. That wing is closed off. It's dusty and unused." Poirot raised a finger. "Not quite. There are signs of recent presence. The painting has been moved, the air shifted. Mademoiselle Anna has heard footsteps. Someone has been there." Silence. Then Mrs. Belling huffed. "Well, I don't go near that place. Gives me the chills." Delphine looked thoughtfully at Poirot. "Could it be someone from outside? A trespasser?" Poirot tapped his temple. "That is one possibility. But I do not think the ghost of Morecambe Hall takes kindly to intruders. None. I believe the answer lies within." Lionel stood abruptly. "I won't be part of this farce. If you think you can dig up some old family quarrels and turn them into ghost stories, be my guest. But you won't find anything." He stormed out. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "He protests too much, perhaps." Ransom chuckled. "Lionel's always been wound a bit tightly." "And what have you, monsieur?" Poirot turned to him. "What brought you back to Morecambe Hall?" Ransom's smile faded slightly. "Isadora left me a letter. It was forwarded to me abroad. She wrote that she feared something, that there were things she could not trust to paper. She asked me to come." Poirot leaned forward. "And this letter? May I see it?" Ransom shook his head. "I burned it. It felt too personal, too painful." "Pity," Poirot murmured. "Still, it is a most intriguing detail." He dismissed the group shortly thereafter and returned to the gallery alone. The silence there was heavier now, pregnant with the weight of something unsaid. He moved to the portrait once more, examining the edges, the back, the wall. He knelt, pressing against the panelling beside the painting. After a few moments he discovered what he had suspected. a nearly invisible seam in the wood, a panel disguised perfectly to blend into the wall. With deft fingers, he pressed at the seam. There was a faint click, and a narrow section of the panel swung open. Behind it was a recess, no more than a foot deep. And within, an object wrapped in yellowing linen. Carefully, Poirot unwrapped it. Inside was a small notebook. The cover was leather cracked with age. He turned the pages with reverent care. Isidora March's handwriting, spidery precise. March the 14th. He asked again. He wants the ruby. I told him it's hidden, but I fear he knows I lied. March 20th. The footsteps again. I heard them last night, near the gallery. I am certain someone is watching me. March 29th. If I disappear, this is the truth. I never gave it to him. It remains where only I can find it. Poirot read in silence, the firelight catching the glint of something beneath the last page. A small velvet pouch was sewn into the back cover. Within it, a single ruby, blood-red and gleaming. Poirot stared at it, then whispered, "So." The whispering was not madness. It was warning. He slipped the journal and the ruby into his coat and closed the panel. As he exited the gallery, the candle flickered violently, as though a breeze had passed through. But the air was still. Chapter 4. Secrets in Scarlet. The morning after his discovery, Poirot sat in the sunroom, bathed in gentle rays that broke through the heavy fog like reluctant fingers. He had taken his usual breakfast, an impeccably buttered croissant and a single boiled egg, and now sipped black coffee from a delicate porcelain cup. On the table beside him lay the leather journal of Isidora March, its last page opened like a wound. He tapped the cover gently. "Mademoiselle March, you were clever. But now the question becomes, who among the living is dangerous enough to have frightened you in death?" He had spent a portion of the night rereading the diary, piecing together the fragments of Isidora's final thoughts. The references to he were never clarified. The ruby, now tucked safely in Poirot's coat pocket, appeared to be the object of contention. But why? Poirot was still deep in thought when Delphine entered. Her expression was strained, her usually impeccable hair slightly out of place. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "you asked to speak with me privately?" "Oui, mademoiselle. Sit, please." She did so, crossing her legs and folding her hands tightly in her lap. "I must ask you some questions," Poirot began, "and I ask that you answer not with politeness but with truth, even when it is unpleasant." Delphine nodded. "I understand. You knew of this ruby, did you not?" Her eyes widened. "The ruby? So it is real?" "You suspected, then? I made Guichou Ischoy." "Did? My aunt once told me stories when I was a child, half fairy tale, half confession. She had been gifted a rare ruby during her travels in India, she said, but she always added that it brought nothing but trouble, that people were jealous, that one should never trust those closest to you when jewels were involved." Poirot nodded slowly. "And did she mention who might be jealous?" Delphine hesitated. "No, but I have my suspicions." "Go on." "I think Lionel was struggling financially. He and Aunt Isidora often argued about inheritance. She never married, you know. Lionel always believed he was the rightful heir." "Was he?" "Not entirely. Aunt Isadora changed her will several times. She told me once she intended to leave a portion to charity, another to the staff, and she implied that I might receive the portrait." Poirot tilted his head. "A curious gift." "She said I had her eyes," Delphine replied quietly. "That I was the only one who ever truly saw her." Poirot's brow lifted. "And Mr. Ransom? What of him?" Delphine gave a short laugh, though there was no humour in it. "You, Philip? He's charming, yes, but I don't trust him. He always had a way of turning up when it benefited him, and he was very close with Aunt Isadora, uncomfortably close, some thought. Romantic? Possibly. Or manipulative. It's hard to say." Poirot tapped his chin. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have helped more than you know." As Delphine left the room, Poirot rose and took the diary from the table. He made his way once again toward the east wing, past servants who glanced at him, with the wary awe afforded only to strangers who walk knowingly into haunted places. When he reached the gallery, he closed the door behind him and turned on his small electric torch. The painting stared back at him, Isadora, immortalized in oils, with her red dress and cold, proud eyes. "You knew your time was short, madame," Poirot murmured. "You set the pieces in motion before the end. But did you know who would come? For it?" He turned to the secret panel once again, reopened it, and retrieved the notebook. There was a page he hadn't noticed before, creased into the binding, hidden against the cover. On it, in a hurried scrawl, "If anything happens to me, speak to Anna." She saw him. Poirot's eyebrows rose. He left the gallery at once. Anna met him in the servants' corridor, drying crystal glassware with meticulous care. When she saw Poirot's expression, she paled. "You found something," she whispered. "Oui, and you are mentioned by name, mademoiselle." Her hands trembled, but she set the glass down and followed him into the pantry, where they could speak without ears pressing to door frames. Poirot lowered his voice. "Isadora believed you had seen the man who threatened her. Is that true?" Anna looked down. I didn't want to get involved, but yes, one night I saw him." Poirot said nothing, letting the silence stretch. It was nearly midnight. I was bringing towels up from the laundry. I passed near the east wing, and I heard voices, so I crept closer. She swallowed hard. It was Mr. Ransom. He was arguing with her, saying she couldn't hide it forever, that others were already asking questions. She told him to leave the house and never return. Did he see you? No, I backed away, and he didn't come after me. I swear it. Poirot nodded gravely. You must not speak of this to anyone else, for your own safety. Poirot found Philip Ransom later that afternoon, seated in the library with a brandy in hand and a volume of Byron open beside him. He glanced up with a smirk. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot, have you unearthed any ghosts yet?" "No, monsieur. Only liars?" Ransom's smile faltered. "I know you argued with Isadora before she died," Poirot said plainly. "She was a difficult woman. You threatened her." Ransom stood. "That's a serious accusation. You were searching for the ruby, were you not?" Ransom chuckled nervously. "What ruby?" Poirot reached into his coat and produced the gem. Ransom's eyes fixed on it with unmasked greed before flicking quickly away. That doesn't prove anything." Poirot leaned in. "No, but your panic might." Before Ransom could respond, the door to the library opened. Lionel March entered, pale and tight-lipped. His gaze landed on the ruby in Poirot's hand. "So it's true," he muttered. "The old bat had it all along." "You knew of it?" Poirot asked. "Everyone did. Family rumour. She never confirmed it, but she enjoyed the power, the mystery. And did you ever look for it?" Lionel glared. "I didn't kill her, if that's what you're implying." Poirot nodded once. "But you resented her. Wouldn't you? She flaunted it all, money, art, jewels, and then refused to leave anything of value behind. She left something of great value," Poirot said quietly. "The truth." He returned the ruby to his pocket and turned to leave. Behind him, he heard Lionel hiss, "I should have had that painting burned." That night, Poirot made his final preparations. He returned to the gallery and, with gloves and care, rehung the portrait. Then he placed the ruby back inside the journal, hid it once more within the panel, and waited. He sat in the darkness, silent and still, until the house settled into sleep. The creaking of old wood echoed like distant sighs. Then footsteps, soft, deliberate. A shadow approached the painting. Poirot's heart quickened. The figure reached toward the edge of the portrait, feeling along the wall. Poirot struck a match. The light flared. "Bonsoir, monsieur," he said. The figure froze. It was Lionel March. "You," Poirot said calmly. "I had considered Mr. Ransom. But no, he is an opportunist. You are the one who knew of the panel, who grew up in this house." Lionel said nothing. Poirot stepped forward. "You argued with her the day she died. She refused to change the will, refused to give you the ruby. You waited until nightfall. You followed her to the gallery. She was going to give it away." Lionel spat. "To a museum. A trinket like that, sitting in a box while this house falls into ruin. I had a right." "You had a motive," Poirot said quietly. "And now you have revealed yourself." Lionel lunged, but Poirot stepped aside, and a second figure emerged from the shadows. Chief Inspector Japp, in plain clothes, raised a pistol. "That's quite enough." Lionel collapsed to his knees. "You tricked me," he whispered. "Non," said Poirot. "You tricked yourself. In the end, it was not the portrait that whispered. It was your conscience." Chapter 5. The unfinished will be morning. Lionel March was in custody. Chief Inspector Japp, who had arrived under the veil of secrecy at Poirot's request, took no pleasure in the arrest. "Tragic business," he muttered, as Lionel was escorted from Marchmont Hall, the great oak doors creaking shut behind him like the final act of a play. Poirot stood at the threshold a moment longer, hands neatly clasped behind his back. Enjeu, sharp eyes scanned the foyer, as if absorbing the memory of what had transpired. Then, at last, he turned and walked with purpose into the drawing-room where Delphine waited. She looked up with an expression that mingled both hope and despair. It was Lionel, then? Poirot inclined his head. "Oui. He returned last night in hopes of retrieving the ruby before anyone discovered it. I had already returned it to its hiding place." Her eyes flickered towards the east wing. "So, it ends here." But Poirot shook his head. "No, mademoiselle, it rarely ends so cleanly. There is still the matter of the will." Delphine blinked. "The will? Your aunt's?" I have found references to multiple revisions, but no one has yet produced the most recent version. Why? Delphine frowned. I assumed it had been read already. Mr. Carroll, the solicitor, was meant to visit after the funeral. Poirot raised one finely sculpted brow. And yet we have not heard from him. It is time I remedy that. An hour later, Poirot sat across from Harold Carroll in the solicitor's London office. A modest affair stacked with paper and the quiet rustle of cautious legal minds. Carroll, a man of rigid posture and heavy spectacles, adjusted his cuffs and cleared his throat. Monsieur Poirot, I regret the delay. Miss March's death caught me off guard. I understand, but I must ask, did you not possess a final will? Carroll hesitated, then opened a slim leather file. Miss March sent me a draft 6 weeks before her death. She intended to sign the revised version in my presence, but we were never able to schedule the meeting. I telephoned several times. She evaded. Poirot leaned forward. Did she say why? No. Only that the house had become unsettling, that she would not receive visitors for some time. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Unsettling how? Carroll closed the file with a sigh. She didn't elaborate. I presumed eccentricity, not fear. Poirot tapped a finger on the armrest, and the contents of the unsigned will, quite different from the one currently in force. Carroll retrieved a typed copy, a third of the estate to Delphine March, a substantial donation to the Museum of Antiquities, and the ruby, explicitly referred to as the Heart of Samarkand, to be held in trust for public display. The rest to be distributed among gay staff and charitable organizations. Lionel March was to receive a small bequest and no property. Poirot absorbed the information in silence. If the document had been signed, Carroll added, it would have changed everything. May we? Poirot said softly. That is why she never signed it. Poirot returned to Marchmont Hall as dusk fell. The sky had darkened into a brooding palette of greys and purples, and a low wind whispered through the garden hedges like a warning. Delphine met him at the door. She never signed the new will, Poirot said, stepping inside. She wished to, but something stopped her. Delphine's brow furrowed. What could stop her? She was so precise about her affairs. Poirot paused, then said carefully, Fear. Delphine paled. Of Lionel, perhaps, or of something greater than him. You see, mademoiselle, I now believe your aunt knew exactly what she was doing in delaying her decision. Delphine's confusion deepened. Poirot led her into the drawing-room, where the fire cast golden shadows on the walls. He gestured for her to sit, then lowered himself into the chair opposite. Let us consider the facts one by one, he said. First, we have Isadora March, a woman of remarkable willpower and independence. She possesses a rare ruby, a gem, with a history of blood and betrayal. She hints at danger in her diary, yet never names her enemy outright. She prepares a will, generous and measured, yet never signs it. Why? She must have been afraid, Delphine whispered. Or she feared that signing it would hasten her death, that someone would stop her before her intentions could be made law. Delphine nodded slowly. That makes sense. Poirot steepled his fingers. Then she leaves clues. Not overt ones, but veiled messages. The painting, the diary, the hidden, Ruby. Delphine sat forward. But you've caught Lionel. Isn't that the end of it? Poirot was quiet for a long moment. Then, with almost painful gentleness, he said, "No, mademoiselle." She stared at him. Poirot's gaze was solemn. Lionel was guilty, but not alone. Delphine recoiled as if struck. "You mean someone helped him?" "I mean," Poirot said, "that someone else orchestrated the conditions. Lionel was impetuous, yes, and greedy, but he lacked cunning. He did not know of the diary. He had no idea how the ruby was hidden." Delphine swallowed. "Then—" "Who?" Poirot's voice was soft. "Someone Isidora trusted, someone close, perhaps someone who encouraged Lionel to act, while keeping their own hands clean." Delphine stood up, trembling. "No, you can't mean Philip." Poirot did not reply. Delphine began to pace. "He wouldn't. He's selfish, yes, and a flirt, but not a murderer. Are you certain?" Poirot asked gently. She looked up, eyes filling with tears. "No, I'm not certain of anything any more." Poirot rose and offered her a handkerchief. "Courage, mademoiselle. The truth reveals itself in time." That night, Poirot returned to the gallery once more. He stood before the portrait of Isidora March, arms folded behind his back. The shadows flickered as candlelight wavered across the canvas. In her painted gaze there remained the same cold brilliance, the knowing glance of a woman who saw more than she ever confessed. "She left it all for me to untangle," Poirot murmured. "She knew the killer would return. But I wonder, madam, did you suspect just how deep the treachery ran?" He turned to leave, but paused. From somewhere in the corridor, a floorboard creaked. Poirot stepped silently toward the door and opened it quickly. The hallway was empty, but in the stillness a soft noise echoed, faint like the closing of a door and the whisper of someone slipping away into the night. Chapter 6. Secrets in the studio morning arrived cold and blustery, rattling the ivy-covered panes of Marchmont Hall, and casting long, uncertain shadows across the corridor walls. Hercule Poirot was already awake, seated at the small writing desk in his guest chamber, composing a letter with careful deliberation. He placed the pen down with a sigh and folded the paper neatly into an envelope. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Delphine, pale from another restless night. "Monsieur Poirot, may I speak with you?" "But of course, mademoiselle." He gestured to the armchair by the fire. "Please sit." She did so, her hands twisting in her lap. "I couldn't sleep. Not after what you said. I keep thinking if there's someone else involved in Aunt Isidora's death. Someone still in the house." Poirot gave a gentle nod. "That is the fear, is it not? That the enemy remains among us." Delphine looked into the fire, her voice low. "I've known Philip for years. We were close once. He's arrogant and lazy and spends more money than he should. But I never thought him capable of this." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "Sometimes those who wear the mask of charm hide darker impulses. But we must not leap to conclusions. We must examine evidence." Delphine turned to him, her eyes wide. "Do you have evidence?" Poirot reached into his coat and withdrew a folded sheet of parchment. "This was in your aunt's diary, tucked behind the final page. A sketch, not of a ruby or a portrait, but of the studio. See here?" He pointed to the drawing, a crude outline of a room with shelves marked and a circle drawn around what appeared to be a tall cabinet. "I believe she meant to guide someone," Poirot said, "perhaps even herself, should her memory or courage fail. She feared confrontation, but left breadcrumbs. It is time we followed them." The art studio in Marchmont Hall had once been Isidora March's sanctuary, a sunlit, secluded space at the far edge of the West Wing. It had since fallen into quiet disuse, dust settling over the draped canvases and forgotten pigments. Poirot and Delphine stepped into the room mid-morning, light slanting through the high windows. It smelled of old oil and linseed, and the echoes of Isidora's last hours still seemed to linger in the air. Poirot moved to the tall cabinet shown in the sketch, tugging gently at its handle. It creaked open, revealing shelves stacked with tubes of dried paint, brushes, and a box of water-stained notebooks. He examined each item with care, his fingers tracing edges and lids with the precision of a surgeon. Then, behind a row of sketchbooks, he uncovered a narrow lacquered box bound in ribbon. Delphine stepped closer. "What is it?" Poirot lifted the lid. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with fine twine, some penned in Isidora's firm, looping hand, others in a script less familiar. He read the first one, brow furrowing. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "It is not merely a question of murder. It is a question of betrayal." Delphine leaned in. "What do they say?" Poirot read aloud from one letter, dated nearly 20 years earlier. "My dearest Isidora, I cannot go on like this. You promised. Discretion, but the whispers grow louder. If they find out, if the family learns what we did in Cairo, the ruby must be hidden. Burn the records. Destroy every trace. I will not have our names buried in scandal." Delphine covered her mouth. "Cairo? You think it's connected to the ruby?" Poirot nodded. "I believe the heart of Samarkand was acquired under questionable circumstances, and someone, perhaps multiple someones, were involved. Your aunt was one of them, but there was another." He showed her the signature on the bottom of the letter, Philip Arkwright. Delphine stood stunned. So it's true. He and Aunt Isidora. We. And more than that, they were partners in a deception. The ruby was not a mere heirloom. It was a secret worth killing for. Delphine sat heavily on a stool, pale. Then Philip had motive. He didn't just want the ruby. He wanted the truth buried forever. Poirot's expression was grave. And your aunt, perhaps, was no longer willing to remain silent. He returned the letters to the box. "We must confront Mr. Arkwright, but delicately. A man desperate, enough to kill, once may not hesitate again." Philip Arkwright was in the conservatory, sipping coffee and perusing a newspaper with feigned nonchalance. He looked up with mild surprise as Poirot entered, Delphine trailing just behind. "Ah, the detective returns," Philip said, folding the paper. "Are you here to announce some new twist in the tale?" Poirot seated himself without an invitation. "Indeed, monsieur. I have discovered something of interest in the late Miss March's studio." Philip's smile faltered for a moment before recovering. "The studio? I was under the impression no one used it any more." "Yet I found letters," Poirot said calmly. correspondence between you and Miss March, dating back to your time in Egypt. Philip stiffened. I beg your pardon? Poirot's gaze was unwavering. You were with her when the ruby was acquired. Perhaps you aided in its smuggling. I suspect the two of you fabricated a story for the family. But Miss March began to have regrets, did she not? Philip stood abruptly. I have no idea what you're talking about. Delphine moved forward. Philip, don't lie. I've seen the letters. His jaw clenched. That was decades ago. None of it matters now. But it does, Poirot said sharply. Because you feared exposure. Because Miss March intended to donate the ruby. To tell the truth at last. And that would have ruined your reputation, your finances, your carefully curated life. Philip's nostrils flared. You think I killed her? Poirot rose slowly. I think you manipulated Lionel into believing he could claim the ruby, while you ensured Miss March never lived long enough to expose you. You knew Lionel's temper. You stoked his jealousy, and when the moment came, you vanished from the A scene clean and blameless. Philip turned away, his voice tight. You have no proof. Poirot's tone was icy. Not yet, but I will. Murder leaves more than fingerprints, monsieur. It leaves echoes, and I intend to listen to every one. Philip's silence was deafening. Poirot turned to Delphine. We shall let him think he is safe for now. But the net tightens. Delphine nodded, her hands trembling. I only hope it tightens before someone else is silenced. That night, as Marchmont Hall slept under the weight of its secrets, Poirot returned once again to the East Wing. He walked the length of the corridor until he stood before the portrait of Isidora March. He bowed his head slightly. Your enemies begin to show their faces, madam, but there is still more to uncover. He paused, then smiled faintly. Your eyes, so cunningly painted, seem almost to approve. And behind him, far off in the hallway, the whisper of footsteps echoed once more. Chapter 7. A voice in the darker. Mood at Marchmont Hall had grown colder with each passing hour. Conversations were stilted, glances suspicious, and no one lingered alone in the corridors if they could help it. Even the servants moved with unease, avoiding the East Wing altogether. A whisper of dread had woven itself into the fabric of the house. Poirot, however, remained calm, serene even, as if the very act of unravelling murder gave him comfort. He spent much of the morning reviewing the letters found in the studio, arranging and rearranging them like pieces of a jigsaw. Delphine joined him occasionally, her presence quiet and watchful. I've begun to doubt everything, she said at one point, watching him work. Good, he replied without looking up. It is when doubt enters that truth begins to reveal itself. Downstairs, Lady Constance had convened a late breakfast in the drawing-room. Philip Arkwright joined them, cool and composed, as if yesterday's confrontation had never occurred. Lionel appeared shortly after, eyes bloodshot, muttering. Apologies no one cared to hear. It was Rosalind who was conspicuously absent. Poirot noticed the omission. She is unwell? He asked Delphine. She said she had a headache, Delphine murmured. I think she's hiding. Indeed, Poirot said. Let us hope it is merely her head that aches, and not her conscience. Later that afternoon, Poirot made his way alone to the East Wing. He had a purpose, though he hadn't shared it with anyone, not even Delphine. He had begun to sense that Marchmont Hall, with all its elegance and inherited grace, held not only secrets, but sentience. The whispers in the corridor had ceased for now, but Poirot trusted the silence even less. He stepped once more into the studio, shutting the door behind him. The air was heavy with the scent of old turpentine and damp linen. In the stillness, he could almost hear Isidora March's brush scraping across canvas. He walked slowly to the tall cabinet again, and opened it, not to examine the letters, but to search the lower compartments he had previously ignored. It was there that he discovered the ledger, bound in worn leather. Its pages were filled with meticulous records, dates, names, locations, many from Cairo, Alexandria, and Marrakesh. In some entries, initials appeared beside mention of the heart of Samarkand. I.M. for Isidora March, P.A. for Philip Arkwright, and once, only once, R.M. Poirot tapped his finger against that set of initials and smiled faintly. Rosalind March was found in the conservatory shortly before dusk, standing rigidly before one of the tall windows. She didn't turn as Poirot approached, but her shoulders tensed. "I assume this isn't a social visit, Monsieur Poirot." "Mais non, mademoiselle, though I do appreciate a good conversation amid greenery." She turned then, her expression composed but strained. "You've discovered something." "I have discovered many things, but one in particular I think may concern you." He withdrew the ledger from beneath his coat and held it out. Rosalind took it reluctantly and flipped through the pages, her breath catching as she found the line he had marked. "I see," she said quietly. "You were in Cairo," Poirot said, "in 1912, not simply on a holiday, but as part of the March expedition. You were young, barely more than a girl, but clever and loyal. I helped Isidora and Philip bring the ruby out. Of Egypt," she said, almost to herself. "I kept the secret all these years." "Why?" She looked up sharply. "Because I loved her. She was my sister, my protector, and because we were afraid." Poirot's voice was soft. "You feared disgrace?" "Yes, and theft. There were others who would have stopped at nothing to take it." Her hands tightened on the ledger. "But then she changed. Isidora wanted to give the ruby away, to the museum, to erase what we'd done, which is when the whispering began," Poirot said gently. Rosalind's eyes widened. "You know?" He nodded. Someone used the portrait's location and its peculiar acoustics to frighten her, to suggest that spirits were watching, whispering. "It was no haunting, it was staged," she hesitated. "And you think it was me?" "No," Poirot said simply. "I think it was Philip." Her relief was palpable, though short-lived. "But," Poirot added, "I also believe you know more than you have admitted." There was silence between them then, broken only by the rustle of ivy outside the windows. Rosalind looked down at the ledger again, as if seeking answers within its pages. "He threatened her," she said at last. "Philip. I overheard them 2 nights before she died. He told her that if she exposed the truth, she would regret it." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And you did not warn her?" "I tried," she whispered, "but she said it was time to face the past." Poirot bowed slightly. "Merci, you have done the right thing at last." Rosalind looked away. As twilight settled over Marchmont Hall, Poirot returned to the portrait gallery. It had become, in a strange way, the heart of the mystery, both symbol and stage. The likeness of Isadora March stared down from its frame, elegant and aloof, as though daring her guests to unravel the truth. Poirot stepped forward and placed a hand lightly on the frame. This, he murmured, was the method. He bent low to examine the wall just beneath the painting. With delicate fingers, he pressed at the baseboards, searching for the hollow spot he had previously noticed. Click. A small panel shifted inward, revealing a narrow cavity in the wall, a speaker's tube once used for household communication in older days. Poirot smiled grimly. It led to the west wing. Back in the drawing room, Poirot gathered the family for what he described as a preliminary discussion. Lady Constance was perched upright in a velvet chair, her silver cane balanced across her lap. Lionel hovered near the decanter, and Rosalind sat near the fireplace, her features unreadable. Philip lounged with practised ease on the settee, though his eyes flicked constantly between Poirot and Delphine. Poirot stood by the hearth, his hands clasped. Mesdames et messieurs, I believe the time has come to share what I have discovered. But understand, what I am about to reveal is not yet an accusation, merely an alignment of facts. No one spoke. Poirot continued, Miss Isadora March did not die from heart failure alone. Her demise was hastened, if not orchestrated, by fear, by manipulation. Someone whispered poison into her ear, used the acoustics of this very house to suggest hauntings, that someone wanted her silenced. He looked at Philip. You, monsieur, had motive, opportunity, and knowledge of this building's old systems. You used the speaker tube hidden in the walls. Philip sat forward, indignant. That's absurd. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Is it? I examined the walls. There is a tube that connects the portrait room to the west wing. Your wing. Philip opened his mouth to respond, but Poirot held up a hand. Tomorrow I shall speak with the authorities, but tonight I recommend no one leave the premises. This affair is reaching its conclusion. He turned toward the door. And in truth, I believe the most important revelation still lies hidden. Without another word, Poirot departed, leaving behind a room thick with silence and secrets. Chapter 8. The Shadows Beneath the Brushstrokes. Restless night descended upon Marchmont Hall. The ancestral house, so long accustomed to its dignified quiet, seemed now to bristle with unseen tension. The very walls hummed with the secrets that Hercule Poirot had unearthed. As though stirred by his revelations, the winds howled against the windows, and the trees outside flailed their boughs like disturbed witnesses. Poirot, meanwhile, sat at a writing desk in his guest chamber, a single lamp casting a golden glow over his notes. The elegant scrawl of his handwriting filled page after page, names, times, sketches of the household layout, phrases underlined thrice. His method was not merely deduction, but a kind of choreography. Each suspect a dancer, each lie a misstep. He had nearly composed the full symphony. Only one instrument remained silent. At precisely 8 o'clock the following morning, Delphine tapped lightly on his door. "You were awake," she said softly, stepping inside. "I thought you might be." Poirot gestured to the opposite chair. "Mademoiselle Delphine, you are very perceptive." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Rosalind passed me in the corridor last night, and she looked pale as a ghost." "Guilt can be an excellent sculptor," Poirot said. It hollows the face more than age or hunger." Delphine leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Monsieur Poirot, you believe someone murdered Isidora. But I must know, do you think they'll strike again?" Poirot considered her question carefully. "Ah, that depends. You see, murder is not often repeated unless the goal remains unmet. And in this case, I believe our murderer thinks himself victorious. That, my dear mademoiselle, is always when they become careless." In the breakfast room, the usual pretence of civility had crumbled. Lady Constance was snapping at Lionel, who had spilled coffee on the lace table runner. Rosalind sat rigidly, sipping tea without tasting it. Philip Arkwright read the newspaper with theatrical indifference. Poirot entered with calm formality. "Bon matin," he said. "Let us dispense with the polite lies. We are all under suspicion." Philip snorted. "Some of us more than others, I think." Poirot gave him a thin smile. "Quite so, monsieur." He turned to Lady Constance. "Might I borrow the key to the attic?" She blinked. "The attic? Whatever for?" "Because," he replied, "I believe the final clue lies not in the past, but quite literally above us. The attic of Marchmont Hall was a dusty, forgotten place. The air was thick with mothballs, old wood, and the scent of mildew. Cobwebs swayed gently between beams, and forgotten furniture stood draped in white sheets like mourners at a wake." Poirot moved carefully, methodically, examining the floorboards and shelves. It was Delphine, trailing behind him with a candle, who noticed the oil painting propped in the corner. "Monsieur Poirot, look at this." He turned and stared. It was a portrait, but not of Isidora. This one depicted a woman in her early 30s, striking and sombre, with unmistakable eyes. Sharp, grey-green, intelligent. She wore a crimson shawl over her shoulders, and in her hand was a delicate brooch, a gold serpent with emerald eyes. Delphine gasped. That's Rosalind." Poirot moved closer. "Indeed, but younger, much younger, and this painting is unsigned." He carefully turned it over. On the back, scrawled faintly in charcoal, was a single word: regret. Delphine touched her lips. She painted it herself. Poirot nodded, and then hid it away. He stepped back and looked around once more. His eyes fell on an antique trunk in the corner. He approached it, unlatched the brass hinges, and lifted the lid. Inside lay papers, drawings, and several photographs. One photograph caught his attention immediately. A group of travellers in front of a stone temple. Isidora, Philip, Rosalind, and a man Poirot did not recognise. The back of the photo was labelled Giza, 1912. "What is it?" Delphine asked. Poirot smiled faintly. "The truth." By late afternoon, Poirot had summoned everyone to the library. The mood was grim. Lady Constance sat imperiously, her hands folded tightly. Lionel stood by the window, fidgeting with his watch-chain. Rosalind entered last and took the seat furthest from everyone, her face unreadable. Poirot did not waste time. "Mes amis," he said, "I believe I now know the full shape of the crime committed within these walls." A flicker of unease crossed Rosalind's features. Poirot held up the photograph. This was taken 13 years ago, during an expedition to Egypt. All of you here have heard whispers of the heart of Samarkand. What you have not heard is that the ruby was stolen from a private collector, not a tomb, and brought back to England in secret. Gasps rippled across the room. Poirot continued. Miss Isidora March possessed a rare conscience. Years later, guilt gnawed at her. She wished to return the ruby, or at the very least, reveal the truth, but someone would not allow that. He turned sharply to Philip. You threatened her. You used the speaker tube hidden behind the portrait to drive her into fear and silence. Philip stood up, colour rising in his face. That's a lie. Poirot ignored the outburst. But it was not you who delivered the final blow. No, that was someone else, someone who had more to lose. He walked slowly across the room and placed the unsigned portrait onto a side table. This, he said, is the key. It is a self-portrait, painted by Rosalind March. All eyes turned to Rosalind. It was hidden in the attic, Poirot said. I believe it was painted in 1913, shortly after your return from Egypt. Rosalind's voice was faint. You found it? I did, along with this. He held up the brooch from the painting, retrieved from the trunk. It belonged to the original owner of the ruby. A gift, perhaps. When Isidora announced her intention to come clean, you feared exposure, financial ruin, scandal. Rosalind rose slowly. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. I didn't kill her, she whispered. I put something in her drink to calm her. I didn't mean... Poirot's voice was soft but firm. You feared she would speak. You meant only to delay her. But your interference, combined with her weak heart and the stress of the whispers, became fatal. There was a long silence. Then Lady Constance spoke, her voice brittle. Rosalind, you foolish girl. Poirot turned to Delphine. Would you be so kind, mademoiselle, as to call Inspector Japp in London? He will want to take Miss March's statement. Delphine nodded and quietly left the room. Rosalind sank into her chair, the last of her strength deserting her. Phillips turned away, and Lionel poured himself a drink with trembling hands. Poirot, as ever, remained composed. He picked up the unsigned portrait and gazed into the painted eyes of Rosalind March. So much sorrow, so much pride. Ah, he murmured, regret, indeed. Chapter 9. In the Footsteps of Shadows. The atmosphere in Marchmont Hall was subdued after Rosalind's quiet confession. Her arrest had not been the dramatic affair many might imagine. She had gone with Inspector Japp without protest, her shoulders squared, her face unreadable. In some ways it had been a relief to all of them. Poirot, however, was not yet satisfied. He stood in the drawing-room late that evening, the portrait of Isidora March once again upright over the fireplace. It was a strange piece, haunting and beautiful, though now stripped of its false aura. The whispers were gone, the speaker tube removed, the mechanisms exposed. He stared at the painting, arms folded, brow furrowed in thought. Something still troubles you, doesn't it? Delphine asked, entering with 2 cups of tea. She handed him one. Poirot took it, nodding faintly. Merci, mademoiselle. Yes, something does not fit as neatly as it ought. Rosalind admitted everything. She admitted to poisoning Isidora's drink with the intention of delaying her. Yes, but that alone did not kill her. We assumed her heart gave out due to fear and stress, worsened by the substance in her tea. Poirot paced to the window, looking out over the frost-glittered gardens. But Isidora was strong-willed, he continued, and there was something in the coroner's report I found odd. Delphine frowned. Odd in what way? Poirot turned to face her. There were bruises on her arm, subtle but consistent with a grip, someone grabbing her forcefully. Rosalind insisted she was not present in the room when Isidora collapsed. She administered the drug earlier and left. Delphine blinked. Are you saying someone else was there when she died? Poirot nodded. Yes, and that person ensured Isidora could never speak. The next morning, Poirot began again, interviewing the household staff, retracing footsteps, comparing timelines. It was tedious work, but the smallest detail might yet unravel the true picture. He spoke with the housemaid Elsie, who had found Isidora's body. She was just lying there, monsieur. So peaceful. Too peaceful, really. Her hand was over her, just like she'd been frightened. Poirot asked about who had been in and out of the West Wing that day. Elsie thought hard. I saw Mr. Lionel coming out of the library that afternoon, but he didn't say anything. Looked a bit flushed, if I remember right. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Flushed? Yes, sir. Like he'd been running or something. And later that evening, he kept pacing in the conservatory, mumbling to himself. Poirot thanked her and went straight to Lionel's study. Lionel looked up from a chessboard he had been puzzling over. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, come to extract yet more confessions. Possibly, Poirot said calmly. Or perhaps to find a motive behind a silent hand. He sat down opposite Lionel. You were in the West Wing on the day Isidora died. You claimed you were reading in the library. Lionel hesitated. Yes, that's right. Yet Elsie saw you come out looking dishevelled. A pause. I may have gone for a walk. Yes, I needed air. Poirot leaned forward. Monsieur, the truth, s'il vous plaît. Lionel's composure faltered. He looked at the chessboard, as if hoping it would yield a more favourable outcome. Finally, he spoke. All right, I did go see Isidora. I wanted her to withdraw her support for Rosalind. I thought she was going to name her sole heir, and I didn't trust her. Poirot said nothing, merely watching. I went to talk, that's all. But she became furious. She called me a coward. I lost my temper. I grabbed her arm, just for a moment, but then I left. I swear it. Poirot's voice was soft. But did you leave her alive? Lionel's head dropped. Yes, she was still sitting in her chair when I walked out. Shaking, but alive. I didn't kill her. Poirot believed him. The desperation in Lionel's voice was not guilt, it was fear. The same fear that had driven many in the house to secrecy. No, Lionel had not been the one, but he had helped. That evening, Poirot sat once more with Delphine in the gallery, where the family portraits hung like ghosts of the past. He looked long and hard at Isidora's painting again. She was a woman of integrity, he said softly, surrounded by people who feared the truth more than they feared the consequences. Delphine nodded. You still think there's someone else involved? I do, and I believe I now know who. He stood abruptly and walked down the corridor, past the stairwell and into Lady Constance's study. She looked up from a stack of correspondence, her cool gaze meeting his. Monsieur Poirot. Madam, he said, you were very quick to blame Rosalind. You pushed for it. Why? Lady Constance's hands stilled. Because I believed she had done it. But did you? Poirot asked. Did you really? She rose. I protected this family, Monsieur Poirot. I always have. Poirot took a step closer. Even from itself? A long pause. Yes, she whispered. Poirot looked at her with sad eyes. You saw the portrait. You realized Isidora was preparing to reveal not just the truth about the ruby, but about everything. The theft, the betrayal, the damage to your family's name. Lady Constance was silent. She told you she would go to the authorities. You tried to persuade her. She refused, so you went to her that night. He waited, and then, in the quietest voice he had heard from her, Lady Constance said, She left me no choice. Poirot closed his eyes. You administered the final act. You were the last to see her alive, and you ensured she would never speak again. She was going to tear everything apart, Lady Constance said bitterly. My husband built this house, this family's legacy, and she would have thrown it away to clear her conscience. Poirot opened his eyes. But now the cost is your freedom. She gave a faint, almost regal nod. Perhaps that is justice. Later that night, as Inspector Japp prepared to take Constance into custody, Poirot stood outside in the garden with Delphine. The air was crisp, and the stars above were brilliant pinpricks in a velvet sky. I can't believe it was her, Delphine murmured. I always thought she was cold, but capable of murder? Capable, yes, Poirot said, but not cruel. She truly believed she was protecting something. And Rosalind? She will face consequences too. Her crime was of negligence, perhaps cowardice, but not intent. Delphine sighed. It's all so tragic. Poirot tilted his head. No, mademoiselle, it is human. People are not monsters, but they are often weak. And when the truth threatens what they hold dear, they sometimes choose the shadow over the light. Delphine shivered slightly and moved closer. What happens now? Poirot smiled faintly. Now, the final portrait must be painted, the whole truth laid bare, and then we rest. Chapter 10. Poirot paints the final portrait. The dawn broke clear and cold over Marchmont Hall. Frost traced the edges of the tall windows, and a faint pink glow touched the distant hills beyond the estate. Inside the drawing-room, Hercule Poirot stood before the portrait of Isidora March. For the final time, the fire casting dancing shadows across the canvas. It was quiet now, eerily so. Lady Constance had been taken into custody the evening before, and Rosalind remained under house arrest, awaiting the full extent of the law's judgment. Only Poirot and Delphine remained in the hall, the others having scattered like leaves after a storm. Delphine entered softly, her dark hair pulled back, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. You said you would explain it all this morning, she said. Poirot turned to her with a small nod. Yes, mademoiselle, it is time. She sank into one of the armchairs, her hands curled around a cup of tea. Poirot remained standing, the flickering fire behind him like a stage light upon a final act. You see, he began, the tragedy at Marchmont Hall was never a simple case of murder for money, nor of jealousy, nor even of revenge. It was, how shall I say, une tragédie familiale, born of secrets, pride and fear. Delphine watched, him quietly as he moved to the centre of the room. Isidora March, proud and principled, had discovered a truth too long buried, that the ruby she treasured, the one named the Crimson Heart, was a fake. The real one had been stolen years ago and sold. The deception had been orchestrated by her own husband, whose debts had driven him to desperation. He gestured gently to the air, as if conjuring ghosts. She planned to reveal this truth and restore the reputation of the March family, ironically by tearing it down. She wrote letters, commissioned documents, and, perhaps most fatally, she had her portrait, painted with the ruby, intending to use it in her exposé. Delphine blinked. But the ruby? Oui, the one in the portrait was genuine. She had reacquired it through back channels. She planned to unveil it alongside her confession, but her intentions alarmed those around her. Poirot walked slowly, his voice soft and precise. Rosalind, fearing she would be disinherited, or worse, implicated, decided to act. She did not intend to kill. She merely wished to stall Isidora's announcement by drugging her tea. But fate intervened. He turned now, his eyes locking with Delphine's. Lady Constance, having realized Isidora's intentions and fearing the ruin of the March name, went to her that same night. There was a confrontation. Isidora was already weak from the drug, agitated, furious. In a final act of panic and conviction, Constance pressed her hand to Isidora's chest, perhaps too forcefully. She silenced her. Delphine whispered. Poirot nodded. Forever. There was silence between them for a moment. Delphine stared at the fire. And the whispering. An invention of deceit, Poirot replied. The speaker tube hidden behind the wall allowed someone, Rosalind in this case, to activate whispers from afar, a ghostly voice meant to terrify and confuse. Perhaps she hoped to drive her aunt into doubt, or perhaps merely distract. Either way, it created an illusion that veiled the truth even further. He walked to the window, gazing out at the estates. Rolling hills! Everything conspired to keep the truth from surfacing. Fear, ambition, even misplaced loyalty. But as always, la vérité, she will out. Delphine stood now, walking over to stand beside him. What happens to the estate? She asked. Poirot smiled faintly. That, mademoiselle, will be determined by the courts. But I imagine the March name will carry on, perhaps tempered by humility. She nodded thoughtfully. And you, Monsieur Poirot? He turned to her. We'll take the next train to London. I have had quite enough of ghosts and galleries, I think. Delphine hesitated. Before you go, there's something I want to show you. She led him down a narrow corridor at the far end of the hall, past the formal rooms to a locked door. She opened it and flicked on the lights. It was an old studio, dusty but filled with canvases, portraits in various states of completion, easels, a long-forgotten painter's refuge. She used to come here, Delphine said. Even after she stopped painting publicly, Isidora, this was her sanctuary. Poirot looked around slowly, could almost see the ghost of Isidora brushing paint onto canvas, her hands steady, her eyes resolute. Delphine walked over to a covered easel in the corner. I found this after she died, she said, pulling the cloth away. It was a second portrait, A self-portrait, not grand like the one in the gallery, but intimate. Isidora seated not as a matriarch, but as a woman. Her face softened with age, her eyes clear, a faint smile playing at her lips. Poirot studied it silently. "I think she painted this for herself," Delphine whispered, "to remember who she truly was." He turned to her and nodded solemnly. Then it must be preserved. Later that afternoon, Poirot made his goodbyes to the few remaining staff. As he stepped out into the wintry air, the sky had turned a bright, brittle blue. He paused at the base of the stone steps and looked back at Marchmont Hall one last time. Delphine came to the door, her coat wrapped tightly around her. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," she said. He tipped his hat. "It has been my pleasure, mademoiselle, though I prefer cases without such sorrow." She gave him a sad smile. "And yet you bring clarity where there was only fog." He inclined his head. "Clarity, yes, but healing, that must come from within." As he turned and walked down the drive, the wind lifted faintly, rustling the trees like a whispered farewell. Somewhere within the great house, the portrait of Isidora March looked on, silent at last. And in the heart of Poirot, as he boarded the train for London, the puzzle clicked into its final place, elegant, complete, and at peace.